Evolution doesn't stand up to rational inquiry.
Funny how it has for over 150 years.
Years ago, I never thought I'd make a video questioning evolution. But my philosophical journey has led to me questioning everything we think we know.
Oh yeah, you're so rational because you question everything. But as we'll see, these are just buzzwords used by woos. Properly answering something means being receptive to the answers. But these people do this so they can appear to be much smarter than those stupid scientists that spend their entire lives studying it. Probably because they have nothing else to recommend themselves.
As a result, it was only a matter of time before I came across genuine arguments against evolution, something very difficult to find. The first thing we need to ask is why this is.
Maybe because there aren't any?
We've seen these silencing tactics many times.
Oh yeah, the big scary scientific cabal is involved in a conspiracy to cover up the truth for some inexplicable reason. How many times have we heard that? There are creationist organizations and creationist websites and creationist journals all over the place. If there is some kind of conspiracy to stop people speaking out against evolution, they're not doing a very good job.
The internet then made information much easier to access and absorb.
And it made misinformation easier to access as well. It's important to be able to tell the difference.
Above all, this is why the internet is now being censored. Evolution is the linchpin to the new religio-political world order we're moving towards.
Wow, so many 50-cent words, no meaning whatsoever. Look, moron! You're claiming to have valid, rational arguments against evolution. Knock off the bogus talking points and make them!
Purely scientific empiricism is not enough to explain reality.
And just what do you propose we use instead? Your fifis?
By the 19th century, there was a heavy hostility towards natural philosophy, as nihilism grew in popularity. This became the foundation for all the relativism we now see today. But without Darwinism as a substitute for the cosmological argument, it's doubtful that Christianity would have declined.
The cosmological argument was debunked thoroughly before Darwin even came along, and you don't need any kind of evolution to debunk it.
You could argue that some other theory may have taken its place, as there was certainly a push to use science to destroy belief in God.
You do know that Darwin was originally studying to be a clergyman, right? There is no sense in which he was attempting to disprove God or Christianity. Creationists have to resort to this lie because they can't disprove Darwin any other way. I've said it one time, I've said it two, and I'll keep saying it as long as it's true. All creationists are liars!
There was, however, another theory around not too long before Darwinism emerged, called Lamarckism, and this was established by Jean-Baptiste Lamarck in the early 19th century. What's fascinating about this theory is that, although still rubbished by proponents of evolution, it's actually being proven more accurate than Darwinism.
Seriously? Lamarckism says that acquired tendencies are passed through generations. We know that's not true because we know how DNA works.
It's important to bear in mind that DNA hadn't been discovered when Charles Darwin was establishing his theory of evolution.
No, but it confirmed evolution marvelously.
Unlike Darwinism, there are many ways we can physically observe this, even within a few generations.
We haven't observed Lamarckian evolution at all. And we have observed Darwinian evolution in just a few generations. In fact, there have been numerous times when Darwinian evolution has been observed.
Even humans change in this fashion, since we know that diet directly correlates with things like brain size, physical strength, and height.
But you don't pass that brain size on to your grandchildren. Unless they have the same environment, they're not going to get the same benefit. Just like if you lift weights and get bigger muscles, that doesn't mean that your children and grandchildren are going to get bigger muscles unless they lift weights too. How completely stupid do you have to be not to understand this?
Crocodiles have changed very little over time, other than the fact that they were once much larger.
You know, you could have just looked this up and you wouldn't have appeared like such a moron. Especially after you yourself acknowledge that the internet puts all this information at your fingertips. Early crocodiles in the Triassic were land-dwelling. Their nostrils were at the top of their heads instead of the end of their snouts. They were also much smaller, not larger like you claimed, and could actually sprint quite well. Then, as dinosaurs became more dominant during the Jurassic, crocodiles began their marine adaptations, bodies becoming longer and flatter, larger and more powerful jaws, and the migration of the nostrils growing much larger over the next 100 million years. When I can find an easy-to-read article explaining all of this in a matter of seconds, then what's your excuse? Oh, but you're the one questioning everything! Give me a break!
Equally, sharks have changed very little too. But we do know that sharks were also much larger in the past.
Again, 10 seconds on DuckDuckGo and you'll find a link saying that the earliest sharks were much smaller, basically a foot long. Today, sharks have diversified, ranging in size from a few inches like the dwarf lantern shark to the whale shark, which can grow to over 40 feet long. I think at this point we can skip over all of his examples since it's clear he doesn't know the first thing about what he's talking about. But then, we knew that as soon as we learned he's a creationist.
Another reason Lamarckism is more accurate than Darwinism is because not only do we know that genes are inherited from parent to offspring, but the new field of epigenetics is proving that gene expression can vary far more significantly and rapidly than initially believed.
No evolutionary biologist today rejects epigenetics, and yet they still work with Darwinian theory. That alone is enough to dismiss your stupid claim. But the fact of the matter is, the ways in which genes express are themselves selected in a Darwinian fashion. You're just anomaly hunting, looking for weird things we've discovered that Darwin didn't know about, and saying that they disprove evolution somehow. Doesn't work that way.
Rather than mutation over time, living organisms already have all the genetic information to express life in an infinite number of ways.
Moron, we've seen new information become introduced into the genome through Darwinian processes. And what do you think those instructions as to when genes should be turned on and off are, if not information?
Once you arrive at this conclusion, you realize that genetic information being pre-established makes it impossible for life to come about by pure chance.
But it's not pre-established, and evolution isn't pure chance. That's a favorite straw man of creationist liars, but there isn't the first bit of truth to it. I'd love to hear this moron explain why we're able to do so much with genetic algorithms that are based entirely on Darwinian principles if it's so impossible for them to work.
Darwinism also cannot take into account how one mistake, however minor, could completely collapse an entire evolutionary chain.
Another chain of words that mean absolutely nothing.
And this makes it all the more obvious why evolution simply cannot explain the emergence of features like the eye, wings, the process of land mammals returning to the ocean as whales, or countless other examples.
Not only can evolution explain them, it has. And the information on all of this is just an internet search away. We know in detail how the eye evolved, including all of the steps. We know how wings evolved, and we have an incredibly detailed sequence of transitionals going from Indohyus, a small land mammal about the size of a raccoon that lived back in the Eocene, to all modern cetaceans.
Something like an eye would have to be perfect from the very beginning.
Wow, how many times does this crap have to be debunked? There are all sorts of extant examples of these different stages in the development of eyes, from simple photosensitive cells to simple cup eyes like in the planarian, and even variations such as the pinhole camera eye of the Nautilus. And our eyes are far from perfect. The photosensitive cells are actually put in backwards, which is why we have blood vessels that have to go inside our eye and obscure some of the light. Very counterproductive. That's because our eyes evolved from nerve cells, whereas the eyes of the octopus evolved from skin cells and don't have this problem. By every objective measurement, octopus eyes are far closer to perfection than our own. The fact of the matter is that our eyes are terrible, producing these murky images, requiring us to have a very sophisticated visual cortex just to be able to sort it out. The octopus doesn't need that.
I had a very, very simple question for him. I said, look, if you can answer this question, then I might well be convinced that evolutionary theory works. He said, okay, what's your question? I said, what is the average rate of evolutionary mutation?
What exactly is evolutionary mutation in your mind? Are you talking about the mutation rates of junk DNA? Or are you talking about actual genes which are going to be more resistant to mutations through selective pressures? Again, a few seconds on DuckDuckGo will yield you some incredibly detailed answers. The chances of any single genetic marker mutating is 0.2%, meaning we should expect it to mutate in about 500 generations. But that varies for different markers. It varies whether you're looking at the Y chromosome or mitochondrial DNA. Look at the source I posted in the description, and you'll see that there are all sorts of different elements at play here.
And he couldn't understand the question. He's like, well, that question doesn't make any sense.
Because it doesn't! Because you're asking it out of complete ignorance of how evolution works. And you didn't even bother to take 10 minutes out of your miserable, pathetic life to educate yourself on the matter before asking about it.
I said, absolutely, it makes sense.
You do not get to respond to a proper dressing down by someone who knows what he's talking about just by saying, "Nuh-uh, does so!"
Biologists do not understand the first thing about statistics. They do not understand anything about probability.
No, you don't. Or else you'd know that things just aren't as simple as you're pretending they are.
One being that evolutionary mutations lead to unusual appearance, like a lump or any number of out-of-place features. If sexual selection is the driving force for evolution, then ask yourself why a living creature would reproduce with another creature that looks deformed or strange.
Yeah, see, that's another question that reveals just so many different ways in which you don't have the first clue what you're talking about. First of all, we see evolution in asexually reproducing species like bacteria. Happens all the time. Second, not all mutations result in visual differences. In fact, most of them don't. Third, those that do generally result in very minor differences that may not even be apparent to a potential mate, and those small differences would accumulate over time to bigger differences spread throughout the species as a whole, so it wouldn't appear to them as if there's anything out of the ordinary. And finally, and most revealingly, you're placing your own subjective opinion onto other species engaging in sexual selection. We can't even do that with other humans. What's attractive for one person might be a turnoff for another. But this is just one more way that creationism is exposed for the authoritarianism that it is. Because authoritarians consider their own subjective opinion to be the one true objective fact.
Fossil records that rely on imaginative speculation to fill in gaps and missing links.
How many gaps do you imagine need to be filled in at this point? Most laypeople can't even tell the difference between one morphological step and the next. You need experts to understand the subtle differences from one to another.
Fraudulent claims and backtracking over many decades.
No, that's you creationists. We've seen that over and over and over again. Remember Tuba City?
It's time we asked ourselves why people claiming to be rational would be so emotionally invested in Darwinism. The answer is rebellion against God and Christianity.
Yep, what did I tell ya? Authoritarian to the core. These people will tell any lie about anyone or anything they need to in order to cling on to the ever-dwindling power they're hoping to keep from the remnants of their Bronze Age fanfic. Hey, thanks for watching. Please hit like and subscribe and keep these videos coming by donating, becoming a subscriber and getting special benefits, or even for free with airtime. And check out all the great content here, like this video selected just for you.